Now, almost anybody can say anything about everything at any time.
I realize that all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. So,
wow.
I'll hold in my expression and let council take the lead.
Animal farm me right now, won't ya? Huh?
The sapiosexual platter.
Now, more than ever, there is an influx of information coming from all manner of sources. There's also platforms where we all have the opportunity to express how we feel, what we think about situations, about people, about countries. One post and an avalanche of comments coming from all over the world. Indeed, we're living in a time where there is freedom of expression. But is this a good thing? On today's episode, we will be interrogating the constitutionally entrenched right to freedom of expression. My name is Shatani Samalakai.
And I am Bels Abo Ame.
And this is
the sapiosexual platter.
Cool. So yeah, freedom of expression.
Yeah.
For me, this topic is interesting because obviously I'm an attorney by profession and I'm big on human rights.
Yeah.
And freedom of expression is just one of those that is just inherent with anybody who's passionate about human rights. You're constantly protecting people's right to freedom of expression.
Yeah.
Passionate about ensuring that there's an enforcement of people's right to freedom of expression. And obviously, historically, we know and we've seen what happens in a society where there is suppression of expression.
Yeah.
When people aren't allowed to, express themselves, express how they feel, what they want.
Yeah.
However, we're living in very interesting times, and I think social media has completely changed the face of what freedom of expression has taken it further than one might ever have thought it could go. Yeah.
Yeah. I want you to maybe touch a bit on the law, because I know that there are certain amendments in relation to freedom of expression. I don't think it's quite open-ended that everybody is free to express.
Right.
I know there's
You mean exceptions?
There are exceptions
Yes.
or clauses that monitor the degree to which people can express.
Yeah.
I know propaganda of war is one of them. And it's quite interesting to see now with what's happening with the Gaza Strip in Israel, that when you post certain news that are in relation to them, the digital platforms sort of constrain how much your content can go out there.
Yes.
The algorithm, for some reason, I don't know, doesn't spread it to as many people as possible. And people get on social media and then they complain that, oh my God, when I talk about Israel, when I talk about Gaza, it's like I don't get as much views. I get 200 views, but if I just talk about something else, I get 2,000 views.
Yeah.
And they think it's a thing where the people who own the social media platforms are trying to hinder the freedom of expression, but not knowing that legally there's this clause that says everyone has a right to freedom of expression, but the amendment of the one that I'm more predominantly aware of is propaganda.
Yeah, with exceptions.
Yeah.
So every right comes along. Every right has its exception.
Yeah.
So with freedom of expression, you have the right to hold opinions.
Yeah.
To receive ideas and information.
Yeah.
To express ideas and information. But there are limitations or exceptions, and this is in relation to national security, I guess on an international level, war, public health, public safety, public order, public morality. So there are limitations for every single right. So even with freedom of expression, there is an understanding that you just can't go around saying just saying everything negligently because it has the potential to harm others.
Yeah.
So it can harm reputation, for example. So there are consequences for, negligently stating untruthful things that, could ruin someone's reputation.
Yeah.
And consequently, words can quite literally incite war. And so with relation to the Gaza Strip, then the exception, at least on social media, is to say, let's try and censor what's happening on social media, so that we prevent, potential wars from taking place or people taking particular action based on some untruthful statement made by another person on social media.
It's quite interesting. I think one of the amendments is, or the restriction is public health. And then when you look at COVID and what happened with COVID, I felt like whatever the superpowers are, drive a certain narrative about vaccines and the importance of vaccines and the use of vaccines. And it's like, then you get the vaccines and the vaccines don't necessarily stop you from getting the illness, and some of them are not that great. And there was just, for the very first time, just a whole explosive conversation about vaccines and how they may be detrimental to people or those particular vaccines. And then you realize that the people behind the vaccines, the pharmaceuticals, have the right to express in relation to public health. And then when you have the conspiracy theorists who are leaking information in relation to vaccines, they would be limited and be told that they are driving people into the negative when it comes to that expression.
Yeah.
So with that, it then makes me wonder, are there people who are above?
I wouldn't say above.
Yeah.
I suppose somebody looking objectively might categorize them as above, perhaps. But I think it's essentially that there's a system, like I'm a very systemic person.
Okay.
But there's a system, and obviously if you've established a healthcare system, there's authorities or sources that you consider credible when it comes to information relating to health. And so pharmaceuticals, I suppose, to some degree, have earned in the eyes of the general public or the lot the right to say things pertaining to health that we can trust as credible because it's supposedly based on certain research and taking the best interests of, all the actors involved before that information is disseminated. So the idea is exactly that, to say, well, those are credible sources. Now, if you come in and you're a conspiracy, theorist, and what do you do? Who are you? What are your intentions? Why are you spreading that information? Then there's automatically, a resistance with relation to what you have to say. So I think it's more a systemic issue. Although, unfortunately, as you say, sometimes you later find out that, well, perhaps the pharmaceuticals actually got it wrong. And so in that situation, then who do we trust? And I guess that's why our conversation on freedom of expression today, say it's quite nuanced in that sense.
Yeah.
But I think we find ourselves in an interesting time because, like I said in my intro, now almost anybody can say anything about everything at any time. And it makes me wonder sometimes, is this really a good thing? Have we gone overboard?
Have we gone overboard with freedom of expression?
Yeah.
No. I think there is mass information that's being spread out or put out because people could, at a click of a button, share whatever they want to share. But I guess maybe the world needed to go on the extremity of people expressing so much, because for many years there's been a lot of gatekeepers when it comes to information. And having people who had access to media, who had access to platforms when they were not as decentralized as they are now, they drove the narratives of where they wanted the world to go and what they wanted the world to think.
Yeah.
So I think now the chaos of what you're experiencing in the world, where everybody expresses, is if something is tilted to one extreme, then it definitely has to tilt to the other extreme, and then society would find a balance somewhere. I do think, though, that there are still people who have more freedom of expression than others, even in an environment where freedom of expression is available to other people.
Yeah.
The people that, even when you just look at politics, USA politics, you know that there are certain media outlets that are left wing, and then there are certain media platforms that are driving the right wing. So you just realize that there's certain powerhouses that are in charge of expression or mediums of expression, and they drive the narrative a certain way. So I think whilst we're in an era where there's a lot of freedom of expression, I do think, though, it still has its limitations. And we saw it with COVID-19, with the influx of just different information in relation to COVID-19 and the vaccines. And if certain powerhouses feel like they don't want certain information out there, they drive the narrative however they want. Maybe the world needs to be as free as it is now, so that, you know, everybody can have a place, a say. But it has become chaotic because I feel like now we're just overexposed to information, and it has become extremely difficult to know which information is credible, which information is not credible. And I even think it's quite alarming because just this expression has also sort of given people a peep behind the veil.
Yeah.
Because media companies like the BBC, they used to be looked at as a point of authority, and
not anymore.
What they say is so credible, and then you get the exposure that you get now because everybody now has the chance to be a journalist in their own right. So you realize that, oh, actually, they are also driving a narrative and expressing to the masses to think or see things a certain way.
Yeah.
So if you realize that, oh, you've been in this haze for so long and there have been people that have been driving a narrative, you also are like, I need to build my narrative and drive my narrative and express my narrative, because if I don't do that, I will just be consuming other people's narratives and living and going a certain direction that is not really directed by myself and my own free will, but rather just the imposition of other people's expression just because they have power.
Yeah. So I think for me, it's interesting because I realize there's freedom of expression, but there's still the powers that be. So we move from the BBC and the CNN, which were traditional news sources, to now Facebook, Twitter, you know, all these social media platforms. And then perhaps the powers that be change from being those news outlets to being who the owner of those social media platforms are. And then because of the democratization of, you know, social media, it be just being kind of all over the world, and, you know, this idea of freedom of expression and allowing, you know, everybody to kind of receive ideas. I think about it from the nation building perspective, to say, if I was the leader of the nation, would I adopt, is it one of the Korean states, that approach to say, or is it China, where
it is the Korean state?
Yeah,
right.
You know, they gatekeep the information that the public is allowed to consume. And for some reason, I see merit in that, because I, you know, give Botswana as an example, where sometimes I just think that, like, you know, it just takes one person saying one wrong thing, and it catches fire because it's sensational, it sounds, you know, juicy, you know, and then everybody's just on it. And I feel like it ends up just affecting the collective conscious. So then it makes me think, well, is freedom of expression all that is cut out to be? Because I think that even with its limitations, this the scope for expression is still far too wide, that it causes damage, in my respectful view. So it's ironic being an attorney and being like, and being passionate about human rights, but then thinking, I think we've kind of maybe taken it a little bit too far with freedom of expression.
Yeah, I like the point that you make about China and I don't know if it's North Korea. I like the expression you make about that, because about them blocking certain medias, like Facebook, I know is blocked in China. Then you have, I don't know if that social media is called Weibo or something that they use to communicate. And they did that because you would find that a lot of our cultures are corroded by the Western
100%.
cultures because they are the ones that are predominantly expressed to us.
Yes.
So it's like if you want to preserve your culture and your way of life, and not rob yourself of your own experience by comparing it to what's out there, you then limit that. And it's quite interesting how it causes a lot of conflict between the different states.
Yes.
When you look at China and the USA.
Because then there's that perception that, oh, then that's probably a nation that suppresses its people. And it's like, is it really suppression or is it protection?
But I think the fight more for me, it's not an issue of the protection. I think it's more America is a capitalist society and their platforms need to thrive. They need masses to thrive. So therefore, if you sort of are China and you block Facebook out, you're blocking a whole billion, more than a billion people to access a platform and make it bigger and earn more. So I think that would be why maybe it's from like a business point, I would think. Anyway, the whole fight with the TikToks and everything.
But it's presented as a human rights issue. So that's what I'm saying. Like,
so
let's be clear. Like, when we're talking about this freedom of expression, and it's presented as this like massive human rights, issue. This nation suppresses its people. They're not allowed to enjoy their right to freedom of expression, which is entrenched in the Human Rights Charter, Bill of Rights, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, okay, you get to advance your narrative. You know, Elon Musk through X. Zuckerberg through Facebook, and whatever the powers that be that are investing money into, that entire platform. And then you just think about, okay, has this really helped that I can, get information from what's happening in China and then what's happening in India and then what's happening in America and what's happening all over the world. Like, this is just, it's information overload, one. Two, it's happening at a time when, like, in terms of, where we're supposed to be incubating. Because I think as independent nations in Africa, we're still at our, the early stages.
You're still forming.
Still
we're still forming the foundation
stages. And so you're not even given an opportunity to just, go within yourself and then find and define yourself before you then expose yourself to the rest of the world, and you're able to compete with ideas instead of just, receiving them without interrogation.
Or just consuming.
You just consume, So I think for me, like, on an international level, that's my qualm with freedom of expression. At least in the way that it, certain states just allow for it without questioning, like, okay, but can't there be limitations as well for a certain time just to allow the nation to kind of form its backbone? Then on a national level, I just have a problem with it because, like I said, one person states one thing, that's some gossip. Goes on social media, and then, like, before you know it, you have 2,000 comments.
Let's bring it home to the Setlhomo case.
The Setlhomo case, that was an interesting one, or is an interesting one, because he made several allegations against CEDA, Citizen Entrepreneurship Development Agency, which is a state-owned agency, which is really was created for purposes of assisting Botswana by providing funding for their businesses. And so Setlhomo made allegations that the CEO, that board members, and several high profile persons in the country, leaders, were engaged in corrupt practices and received monies they weren't supposed to receive, so forth and so on. CEDA sought to fight that part of the case, and now if you think about the protests that have arisen as a result of his statement, you're just like, whoa, okay, freedom of expression, but to what degree?
I don't know. You have to hold people accountable to a certain degree, and I guess when people don't have any power or money, they think that be a whistleblower and exaggerate things to get attention.
But
even if you present them the way that they actually are, even if there's been wrongdoing. Let me just take it to an extreme so that I can get the attention of people. I don't know.
And
But
that's my thing.
yeah.
So the idea of freedom of expression, creating this culture that erodes our ethos as an African people. Because I believe that, like, as Africans, as Botswana, we believe in botho, we believe in integrity, we believe in honesty. And so what is the purpose of sensationalizing a statement or sensationalizing something, and then you want to, piggyback of, no, I have a right to freely express myself. I'm like, to what end though?
Yeah.
Like I have a problem with that. Yeah. And then I also just think about it from like the spiritual perspective, which is also backed up by science.
Yeah.
This idea that, words hold power. And I guess that's why you want to protect freedom of expression and why you have limitations that prevent you from making certain statements, because you know that literally with one statement you can incite war, you can incite violence.
Yeah.
So my thing about freedom of expression at a national level and the way that it expresses itself or, kind of takes place is that people don't realize that, like, one person makes one narrative and then it sticks in the minds of people. And then we create this energy in a country. And you're like, where did this energy come from?
Yeah.
It wasn't even made from like a truthful statement. It's just that somebody was supposedly exercising their right to like freedom of expression.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do share your sentiments that things have gone overboard. I think for the longest time, media was centralized in certain entities, and that in itself restricted the people who had access to freedom on a public platform or to really air their views in a way that mobilizes people into a certain action. So even when you look at the history before the 2007, the Facebooks, you would have maybe in our country, Botswana television, and then you'd have a few newspapers, daily news and all the like. So if you have a story to tell or you want to whistleblow, you sort of have to go to the same powers you're trying to whistleblow against to give you a platform to say something.
Yeah.
And because of that centralization for so long, and the one that we also gave an example of, BBC and CNN and all the like, in order to come to a balance, people have to tilt to the extremity of things. It's not justified, but I think it's like a child learning to walk. You're figuring things out. You walk, you fall, you make some mistakes, you run into a wall. And I think expression has gotten to that point, and social media has done that, because I made a post the other day and I shared one of my early times in social media. And I put it on my story and I was like, the times I used to overshare.
Yeah.
And a lot of people reacted to that post so much. They're like, oh my God, because I wrote social media will be the death of us. And people were just sharing stories about how their loved ones, their family members are just oversharing on social media and they try to restrict them or restrain them. And it just made me reflect, because I realized that nobody has a manual to social media. And what is the right way of acting? What is the wrong way of acting on it? It's like all of us, we were all new, excited, exploring this thing. So we are emotional creatures as human beings. So you may think something, then you ruminate over it, then your mind exaggerates it, and then you just get behind your keyboard and you start typing away. Because you are expressing, you have thoughts, you have ideas, you have opinions. And I guess that's the power of freedom of expression, because then when you share those opinions and ideas with other people, they share their thoughts, their opinions, and then you're able to sort of come to a more refined place. That's the positive of it. But then the negative is obviously what you've said. And I just think it's people just being excited about this little cookie in their hands and trying to figure this thing out and not understanding the repercussions of it. Because even with my personal journey, I was like, why the hell was I sharing? We don't care what you just got. We don't care. Like, nobody cares. What are you sharing for? And I think it's for people to walk the journey with it and to arrive to their own awareness and their own understanding of the power that is in their hands, because human beings are more powerful than ever because of these computers that we have. You can literally just access the whole world at the click of your button. it's quite extreme. I think the one thing that I'm uncomfortable with is the consumption. I think nobody sits down and puts pizza and cupcakes and then rice and then meat and then just spends the whole day eating that without a pause. At some point, your body's gonna tell you that
Enough.
you've consumed enough.
Yeah.
And with this expression and everybody expressing and everybody being a social media influencer, everybody being a point of authority and expert in a field, there just becomes this deep saturation of information overload, and we don't even have control over it because we're so addicted to social media. So you spend the whole day scrolling. You can spend the 4 hours on TikTok scrolling, 2 hours on Instagram scrolling, and just eating. When you take a break, when you're working, you go on social media, and it's just like you don't go and munch on or nibble on food every 2 seconds. But with this right to expression and this freedom and where it's gotten to with all these platforms, it's like people are just constantly putting things out there, and we're also consistently consuming. And I don't know what the psychological effect of it is in the long run, because with food you can see it physically. You become overweight, and I guess we're going to become mentally overweight, and maybe that's why mental health is where it's at currently, because people are just psychologically consuming with no breaks.
Yeah.
So that's the only, like, the main discomfort that I have with so much expression. But I also see it necessary, especially when it comes to people of my background, that we spent so many years, people driving our narratives and telling our stories and expressing them for us. So you sort of like have to take charge. And that's how even the sapiosexual platter came about, to say African stories have been told. We've been told the stories about us and who we are. And now we want to share our thoughts, because we do have thoughts contrary to the rest of the world and their view on us. We do have thoughts, we do think, we do analyze, we do observe, and we don't have to be told how our continent needs to be. And I think the power of expression is that you have to exert it in a very aggressive way, as you said in a previous episode.
What do you think the African approach should be in dealing with the problem of freedom of expression, as you just shared?
On what? In relation to what?
I mean, what should we do? Like, say if you're a leader and
Yeah.
you've identified the gluttony of, consumption, and the fact that it's obviously not even censored, and, it's not controlled.
Yeah.
A 5-year-old is getting information right now if they just click Island, if they click UK, if they click India.
Yeah.
They're getting information from that, and, you can't necessarily know, like, what's the majority of information that they're consuming in a day.
Yeah.
And so for me, what should the African approach be if we're going to liberate African minds? Do we continue to allow, unlimited access to information from all over the world?
Yeah.
Or do we adopt the China approach?
I think nature has a way of balancing itself. I think evolution takes place naturally. And I think that it is necessary for people to be exposed to the mass information that's out there, because then it cultivates the ability to observe, reason, and come to your own individual system of what information resonates with you. And, it's making people inform themselves, be investigators, researchers, because there's just so much that's given before you. You don't know what's true, so you have to investigate. And I think it's very important for Africans to be exposed to information all around, because for the longest time we were exposed to one-dimensional information that I've already shared, sort of put us in a certain branding and framing. And now if we're going to cultivate independent thinking, the process of cultivating independent thinking is that the exposure to different possibilities, different realities, and then from that exposure just saying, what do I resonate with? What do I relate to as truth? And it's an inescapable experience. It's a very necessary one, and as much as it's uncomfortable, I do think that the era of the internet has created me in relation to my own free will, choosing to say, I want to have a podcast, I want to talk about these issues, and exposing myself, because I love to research and read, and just exposing myself to different things. And when you realize even just the mental colony of Africa exists because we were only exposed to, for the longest time, to Western information.
Yeah.
And then now going to India and exploring that side and seeing like, oh my God, this is brilliant, this is great. The Western media would sort of turn us against other people. You know, even when you just look at stories that are driven around in relation to the African continent, stories that we hear about the DRC or Nigeria or Nigerians and just people 419, they're just certain narratives that are driven. And it's important that you get an exposure to those narratives and also other narratives so that you're able to come to your own conclusion. And I've had so many experiences of that sort. When I went to school in England, I was told, you know, stay away from Nigerians. This is what's happening. And then guess what? The Nigerians are my family members and they're absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
And you just realize that, oh, I would have robbed myself the experience of love to that degree if I didn't allow myself to be exposed to other possibilities and other realities, notwithstanding what I have been one-dimensionally consuming from media.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. It's a very balanced response to say, well, you can't have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah.
So quite correctly, you did mention that, you know, we are products of, you know, freedom of expression, as it were. The fact that we have access to all kinds of information, it just creates this melting pot, as it were, of who we become, you know, which is highly exposed persons who, you know, now seek to share the information that we have, you know, we have been exposed to in order to liberate others as well. But also appreciating that I think then the answer for me then is the solution rather is exertion.
Yeah.
Is to say, now it's our turn to then share our narratives and drive the narrative. So rather than, you know, blocking it, you know, just be aggressive with continual driving of what is the African narrative, who is the African, and perhaps that's how we compete and eventually, you know, down the noise and are able to tell the difference between, you know, what's real, what's fake, what's nonsense, what's substantial. And I think, that leads to a more beautiful experience of freedom of expression.
How do we draw the balance in terms of expression? How do we give people the platform and the freedom to indulge themselves and express themselves? But how do we also protect societies and protect the minds of people, protect the reputations of people? We would love to hear from you here at the Sapiosexual Platter. What are your thoughts? Please do leave your comments and engage us in this conversation. Like if you liked this video, and definitely share it with your friends. We would want to collectively, as a people, a tribe, the sapiosexuals, come up with formulations of how to resolve things in society. Express yourself, express your opinion. It's very much welcome here. I am Belse Abo Ame.
I am Shatani Samalakai.
And this is the
Sapiosexual
Sapiosexual Platter.